probably agree on.
Yeah, the playoff team for sure.
So do you.
I mean, I tell you what, I don't think there was a more accurate state. And
if they struggle again, I mean, I don't think there's any way you can keep Alex Critch, but.
What's going on, y'all? Bud Elliott here. It's another edition of my summer school series on the Cover 3 podcast. That's our college football preview show. Today, Minnesota. I'm going to go to Gopher Illustrated. My man Ryan Burns joins me. What's going on, dude?
Living the dream here and over the summer. Excited for Big Ten Media Days. Excited to actually see what this Big Ten is going to look like with the addition of those West Coast schools, and we'll see how everybody kind of stacks up. So excited to talk a little college football today.
I have not attended the Big Ten Media Days before. I've always been sent to ACC or with the prior company, the SEC. So I'm excited to get to India. We are going this year, so it's going to be a good time, I think.
Well, as someone who's gone there numerous years now, I'm sure you'll hit up St. Elmo's. I think Indianapolis is a good location to hold it. I know it's central for everybody. Now, obviously, me in Minnesota, I'll take a flight, but I mean, once you've done it a few times, I'd be okay if that thing starts to revolve to different cities. But Indianapolis is a good time.
Chicago would be a good one as well. I would say, if the Big Ten is listening, which CBS Big Ten, I assume they are. Always start these by scanning for coaching changes. Minnesota's running about the same stuff on offense, I think, but defensively, Joe Rossi is gone to Michigan State. What do you anticipate the defense changing with his departure, if any?
I think schematically it's going to look very much the same. That was one of the big things that PJ Fleck was looking for when he was going to hire a new defensive coordinator was he kept the rest of the defensive staff. And so if you're going to do that, you better have someone that knows what a 4-3 defense or a 4-2-5, depending upon how you want to look at it, really runs. And that's what they did. And went and hired Joe Harris-Simiak from Rutgers, Corey Heatherman from Rutgers. Joe Harris-Simiak is the one who runs the Rutgers defense. His number 2 in command, whether it was at Maine or at Rutgers, was Corey Heatherman. And so if you can't go out and get Harris-Simiak, who's very, very highly paid there at Rutgers, you're going to go get his number 2 guy. Someone that's had a lot of success at Maine, someone who had a lot of success at James Madison. One of the things I've heard from talking with numerous coaches in this profession about a Corey Heatherman defense is the word blitz. Now, I think Minnesota's got some guys on the outside that can cover. And Justin Wally, who's going to be in his 4th year as a starter. They went out and got Bucknell transfer. Ethan Robinson as well, who is one of the most sought-after players in the December portal at corner, had offers from places like USC and Auburn. Minnesota's able to get him. So if you're going to blitz, you better be able to cover on the outside. But it's going to be interesting to see because Minnesota defensively was just so bad against the run, and they gave up far too many explosive plays. And so if you're going to win more games in the Big Ten, you got to be able to stop the run. You can't have 4-play, 75-yard drives. Now, in theory, they return a lot of starters defensively. They got one of the best pass rushers in the Big Ten in Ja Joyner. Hopefully their best linebacker, who should be their best player on defense, Cody Lindenberg, can stay healthy. Someone who's 6'3", can run sideline to sideline, and he can completely change the scope of this defense. But for Corey Heatherman, it's trying to figure out how all the pieces fit because he does want to be more aggressive than Joe Rossi, but I don't know that he's got potentially the personnel to do so.
Makes sense. Where are the most improved spots on this team for 2024?
I would say I think I'm going to be very curious to see what they look like offensively because for all the things that Ethan Kaliakmanis still could be in the future at Rutgers, I think getting in a veteran like Max Brosmer could completely kind of change things for this passing offense that has been an absolute eyesore for the last 3 years. When you look at what Max Brosmer did at New Hampshire, I mean, he was one of the most prolific passers in the FCS. And from being able to watch him, I think one of the things I always like to see is what are quarterback tendencies, such as checkdowns, such as just being able to throw it short. That was one of what Max Brosmer one of his strengths at New Hampshire was. Now, he also happened to have a 5th-round pick in Dylan Laub. And if I had a running back who was in the NFL and he was playing at New Hampshire, I'd probably target him 80 times in a season. But I think introducing a short passing game is going to be something that I'm going to be very curious to see if that translates over to the fall, because I can count on one hand the number of times I've seen a Gopher quarterback check down the football in the PJ Fleck era. And then you look at what Max Brosmer loved to do at New Hampshire. He loved to get the ball out quick to running backs, tight ends, obviously receivers on short routes. So it's going to be interesting to see because we're used to seeing at certain points of the Minnesota tenure under PJ Fleck an RPO offense in the Kirk Shiraka era, and now heading into year two with Greg Harbaugh. I think they're trying to evolve offensively where they are still going to run the ball, but they know if they're going to have success in this new Big Ten, especially with these new teams, they have to be able to have a competent passing offense. And with what you have there in Max Brosmer, you have a running back in Darius Taylor, who's, when healthy, one of the best running backs in the Big Ten, whether you look at missed tackles force, yards after contact, and then you have an all Big Ten receiver returning in Daniel Jackson. You have some pieces there to move the ball through the air. It's just how does it all come together and how soon, if any?
Let's fast forward, or perhaps by the time this is released, use the time machine. Who's a guy who we don't anticipate being voted to first or second team all Big Ten in the preseason, who should have a pretty good shot of being there, come the postseason awards list?
I think offensively, I'll stick with Darius Taylor, someone that, again, you look at the stats last year, when he was healthy, he was tremendous. I mean, he ran for over 100 yards in the games that he obviously started. I mean, again, someone that is prolific in yards after contact, someone that can force missed tackles. It's just about health with him. Now, it doesn't help that he was injured most of the season. Why? Well, when you give a freshman running back 92 touches in 14 days, I wonder why they might start to break down a little bit. So there's been a lot of talk this offseason about trying to keep him in that 20-ish range so that they can get 200 touches out of him. And if Darius Taylor plays in 10-plus games, he's going to be on an all-Big Ten team. I have no doubt in that. And then defensively, it's Cody Lindenberg. I mentioned him earlier. Even with a top 100 pick at edge there in John Joyner, he's going to get a lot of publicity. But I think a lot of people are forgetting about Cody Lindenberg at linebacker there, where when he has been healthy, and that's been the other key here, is he missed 8+ games last year because he had a nagging soft tissue injury that just carried into the fall. If he's healthy for 10+ games, he's going to have an insane amount of tackles. He's very disruptive. He can cover you. I mean, he can do all the things you want in a Big Ten linebacker, but for both Lindenberg and Darius Taylor, it's all about health.
Which positions can most afford to dip into their depth?
I think running back, which is one of the things that I think Minnesota really wanted to address this offseason, because we saw in mid-October, you're on running back 5 last year, which is the way that the angry running back god just struck down upon this Minnesota running back room. They went out and got 3 transfers from the portal. I think highlighted by C.A. Bangura from the MAC, someone who ran for over 1,000 yards, was all MAC just a couple seasons ago, someone that really fits the mold of what they're looking for. Nick McKissick-Luke, the running back coach, 6 foot plus, 200 pounds, is caught 50 balls in his time for the Bobcats out there. They also got Marcus Major from Oklahoma, someone that when he has been featured for the Sooners, he put up pretty good numbers. And you look at the Pro Football Focus grades, someone that can help you there. And they also got Jaron Mangum from Michigan State, someone who's bounced around from Colorado to South Florida to now Michigan State and now to Minnesota. I think the theme you see there is big backs that can potentially handle a bigger workload, because yes, you're going to have Darius Taylor, who you want to feature there. But I think Minnesota learned that when you're on running back 5, things get a lot more difficult, and that play sheet gets a lot more condensed if you only know your running back 5 can run outside zone or mid zone. And I think opposing defensive coordinators can then circle back on that. So while I hope to see Darius Taylor get 200+ touches, I think Minnesota learned from last season, we should probably stock up from the portal at that running back position, especially with some graduations happening there.
Which are the position battles that you'll have your eye on the most come fall camp?
I think I'm going to be curious to see offensively what it looks like at receiver. I mentioned Daniel Jackson, an all Big Ten receiver returning, but the reality is the receiver hasn't been good enough for years. I mean, they have talent there that just has to play consistency. I mean, they brought in a guy from Charlotte last year by the name of Elijah Spencer, put up prolific numbers for Charlotte as an underclassman, and then only catches 9 passes last year. And then when we watched him here in the spring, he struggled with drops. If he can just get over the mental hurdle of catching the ball consistency like he did at Charlotte, you can have certainly a competent receiver there. You've also got guys like Lemeki Brockington returning from injury. You've got Tyler Williams, who is a former top 150 overall player just 18 months ago. Gets a year of development at Georgia, certainly a different body type in that room at 6'2+. but they need to have different guys step up there, because Daniel Jackson already got 35% of the targets last fall. And now you graduate, I think, at least 50% of your target share from last year. Yeah, some of it will go to the tailbacks now, but it's going to be what pass catchers can step up. And I think defensively, what does it look like at safety without Tyler Nubin? Because they didn't address it in the portal. They really didn't go out and bring in someone that they're expected to start now. They do have a top 100 overall player in the 2024 high school class coming in Coy Parrish, who was the All-American Bowl MVP.
That kid's pretty fun to watch.
He's going to be a really good player, but I don't think he can help you a ton. I don't think expectations should be for a true freshman to come in and play 500 snaps. Now, we've seen it just like from the Purdue safety, I think Dylan something or another, but I don't think that should be realistic. So it's going to be, how does Minnesota, who just lost their best playmaker, I mean, Tyler Nubin leads Minnesota football history in interceptions. And now you're looking at both free and strong safety that are going to be competing with underclassmen. Can you cover in the middle of the field? Can you make that tackle in the hole? So instead of a 58-yard gain, it's just an 8-yard gain. I think there's questions that I have on both sides of the ball there.
That makes a lot of sense. When I look at this schedule, no Oregon, no Ohio State. Now, they don't get Northwestern, or that's, I don't know, Northwestern or UCLA, I guess, is probably the worst. Well, Purdue's probably the worst Big Ten team. They don't get Purdue either. So they have to play like a decent stretch of the middle bottom of the conference. But it is certainly nice to not have to play Oregon and Ohio State if the preseason Vegas stuff is correct. And in the non-conference, it's pretty easy. Like, Minnesota played with North Carolina for a large stretch of that game last year before the quarterback got hurt. I thought that like physically, like, they weren't outmatched by North Carolina, and when he went down, it kind of went a little sideways. And then you get a Rhode Island and then Nevada, which is probably the worst FBS team, I'd have to imagine. What are your expectations for this team with this schedule? And do you think PJ Fleck feels pressure to have a bounce back year when when you don't have Ohio State and Oregon on the schedule?
I think he feels pressure, but I'll say this: PJ could lose every game this year and he's not going to get fired.
Sure, yeah.
I look at the buyout; it's north of $22 million. I can assure you, Minnesota doesn't have $22 million to fire PJ Fleck. Fleck could lose every game next year and he's not going to get fired. It's north of $18 million. And like I do, there's only been 3 college football coaches in the history of college football that have been fired with an $18+ million buyout. Yeah. And I can assure you, the Golden Gophers do not have Texas A&M money. So there's pressure, but I would say this to your point. I mean, I remember being at that North Carolina game last fall, and if Minnesota just hits wide open players in the middle of the field, it would have been a 2-point game late in the third quarter, and we would have seen what happened. Now, Drake May was obviously tremendous. That's why he was a 3rd overall pick. Yeah. But I look at that game right now, Minnesota's a 2-point home favorite. I have a lot of questions about what North Carolina looks like at the quarterback position. But there's just so many games on this schedule to where there's 2, to your point, where, to me, I think Ohio State and Oregon are the 2 best teams in the Big Ten, and you avoid both of those teams. Now, you're going to be double-digit underdogs to Penn State and Michigan, and you're likely going to lose those games. Absolutely. But then I look at the next 10 games. You got 2 you're for sure going to win, in Nevada and Rhode Island, unless things go completely pear-shaped. So there are 8 games in between where I fully anticipate that spread being within a touchdown one way or another. So how do you do in those coin flip games? I mean, there's so many games on this schedule to me where you have an opportunity to make a statement and you have an opportunity to not. And even if you just win half of those games, so say you go 4-4 in that stretch, and then you win those 2 non-conference games, or potentially those 3, I mean, you're sitting at 6-7 wins, which in the new age Big Ten for a school like Minnesota, it's not a bad year. I think it's a pretty good outcome, all things considered. There's just so many questions I have about so many of these teams, and we were talking about it before we started hitting record. Which quarterbacks in the Big Ten are going to be good? There's so many transfers that are working with a new coordinator for the first time, including Minnesota with Greg Harbaugh and Max Brosmer. But I look at Iowa, I look at Wisconsin, I look at UCLA. I mean, USC is going to be starting a new guy. There's so many teams on the schedule to where which teams are good, which teams are not. All right. Even I look at that game in early November, the revenge game for so many players and coaches alike between Minnesota and Rutgers, with Kirk Ciarrocca coaching against his old team, Ethan Kaliak-Manis now starting for them. Corey Heatherman just was the number 2 on that defense. I mean, there's so many games in the schedule where it's like, if you flip the coin on those 8 games and it comes up heads half the time, you're going to be going to a bowl game easy. If it comes up 7 of the 8 times, I mean, you're going to win 8 games and it's a great outcome. But if injuries hit again and Max Brosmer turns an ankle and is out for 4 to 6 weeks, well, you're going to be starting a true freshman in the Big Ten, which there's a lot of hopes for Drake Lindsey, but I think a lot of people would like to have him obviously redshirt, because when was the last time a true freshman in the Big Ten really went well? So there's things that have to break well for them. But to your point, there's so many games on the schedule where it's like, this isn't a crazy hard schedule. There's 2 games where you're going to be a double-digit underdog, and everything else is right there in front of you. It's just, how do you go out and get it? And it's going to come down to, can Max Brosmer, as you know with anything, if your quarterback's going to be really good, you have a chance to be pretty good. So is Max Brosmer the player that the Senior Bowl thinks, who he's one of 6 Big Ten quarterbacks to be on that list? Or is he what maybe some national pundits think, and just kind of think, is Minnesota off to the wayside here again, fighting for a bowl? So which way it goes is going to come down to a lot of it, Greg Harbaugh and Max Brosmer.
We'll be following it all on Gopher Illustrated. Ryan, really appreciate the time as always, man. It's been fun.
Appreciate you, bud.